Hello, listeners, and welcome to the latest episode of the AdQuick MAdvertising Podcast, a podcast that explores the intersection of technology, content, culture, marketing, all of the things that you care about. Today, we have a special guest. We have Gregory Kennedy. He is the VP of Marketing at Alembic. I think I said that right. The founder of Brand Zen and an OG marketer in the space. Gregory, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Awesome. And so actually, Gregory, I wrote down a bunch of questions for you. Some are easy, some are harder. I don't know what order we should go in if you have a preference. Actually, and for our audience, I was just with Gregory in Seattle at an event. We should have recorded in person there, but we're doing it live, doing it on the internet, and we'll try and get an episode with Gregory in real life at some point.
Yeah, I thought we're going to go really deep on conspiracy theories and secret societies. So I'm all brushed up on that.
I have a conspiracy theory question. Let's not start with that one. Actually, a good place to start would be, so earlier today, I actually posted a really interesting chart, which for people who are just listening, which is most of you, there's a chart showing the decline of trust in American media. And it's a chart that is basically going straight down from decades ago until now. And this obviously has big implications for all of us on this show. A lot of us run ads alongside media, or we do PR and we want to get in front of publications. But with trust in traditional media declining, that doesn't just hurt the country, which is worse, but it hurts our jobs. So I'm curious, your thoughts, just like however you want to take this one, gut check what this means for advertisers. Are the gatekeepers changing and it doesn't even matter? Any thoughts you want to share on the sort of decline in media?
Yeah, really good question. Yeah, I saw that chart this morning. It's been passed around social media. I think there's a lot to say on that topic. And so I would start with growing up, I was a huge fan of the New York Times. I used to read it cover to cover and really respected it. I'm still a huge fan of The Economist. I was a subscriber for many years. It was kind of pre-internet or pre-social media. And I used to painstakingly write these formal letters to the writers of The Economist, and they'd write me back and I would get all excited about it. I was joking that it was almost part of my identity at one point. I was so dedicated to reading The Economist cover to cover every week and having a really strong opinion on all the stuff that they wrote that it took over my life. And I had to eventually cancel my subscription because I had other things to do. But for me, coming from that world where I took it really seriously, it was a big part of my life. And I really enjoyed and respected what they wrote. I feel like over time, the quality of that journalism just isn't the same as what I started with. And I think the obvious reason is that all these competing media options have emerged. It's not just social media. It's the bar to publish has just gotten lower and lower and lower over time, right? So you go back to I'm from the 90s where it was very difficult to do, although I did publish Xerox fanzines and there was kind of an underground, it was very hard to access and it wasn't popular. But then you had the rise of social media and blogging and a lot of different tools out there. I would even start with perhaps Craigslist as the first one that emerged that was competitive from a business model perspective with what was the bread and butter of newspapers, classified ads, right? And so that sort of really cut into the revenue generation side of the newspaper business, which was a fantastic business for many, many years. So they saw their revenue streams decline and competition from all angles, right? So on the revenue side, they have competition everywhere. People are able to buy targeted ads, local ads, Craigslist ads, all kinds of stuff. And then on the content side, they have competition from all kinds of talented people like you that write incredible blogs and have done it for a long time and just do it for free, right? And you have big reach. Anyone can get a lot of reach now through social media. So they're just seeing challenges in how their business works. And so I would say that the reaction has been to ultimately look at digital media as it's all valued the same. It's valued as in terms of clicks. And so either there are options as a publication art to generate clicks to their properties and then generate clicks for advertisers. And so if you look at it really one-dimensionally like that, the content becomes not something that is a secondhand consideration. It actually becomes something that you're looking at to just drive clicks, right? And so you have BuzzFeed and all these things that emerged that were just designed to do clickbait, because that's how the new world of digital media is at least viewed upon by legacy media. I don't necessarily think that's the case about how media has to be, but I do think that that would be my kind of like large kind of summary about like what's happened. And I think that this decline in the quality of the journalism, the quality of the writing, the quality of the ideas that they present is what is directly responsible for the decline in trust.
Yeah, I mean, you pretty much nailed it. And I called this in a Substack post I wrote, sort of the subprime attention bubble. And so BuzzFeed, which you mentioned, is a company I shared in the post, and you see their, stock chart. They're a public company, so we can see their valuation and what the market actually values it at. So a lot of these brands, when they were slapped with reality in kind of a, post-ZERP world, they were basically getting low quality attention, low quality traffic. And you do that, like you said, sacrificing trust. But I think when you see the quality of a lot of niche media substackers, the Free Press is a great example. That's a new, actually new mainstream publication that covers not just politics, but, society, a lot of different topics. And I think that their writing quality is very high. And the reason is they're actually paying for subscribers, or they have subscribers paying for their publication, which changes the entire calculus of what they can do. So I still think, though, that I'm also working on another thesis here, that media in the age of the internet is kind of like a restaurant. It's perfectly competitive. There's so many options. You don't even have to go to a restaurant. You can get your food at home. So I don't think that you can survive with being a low quality option. And I don't know why you'd want to, when it's a lot more fun and your customers like you that much more to be like this really cool boutique offering, and people are willing to pay a premium for these things. The other thing is that a lot of people were really unimaginative, and they thought, oh, the entire internet should be free forever. People don't want to pay for things online. I've had friends that are really talented writers that I think should have probably monetized their blogs, but never did, because they're like, oh, I don't deserve to be paid money for this. It's just writing online. But all of that sentiment is changing. And if you look at, for example, there's a company called Beehive I advertise in, where it's basically they're taking your ads as a company and they will run it alongside newsletters, niche blogs that are aligned with that company category. And the quality of audience you reach is very high, because the economics are different for like one or two, or, maybe 3 or 4 people running a site. And, you can just reach a very passionate, niche, interested audience versus the content mills that are just pumping out junk, and AI can do that anyway. So it's a whole new world for media, for advertisers who are having to advertise on that. So we could talk about that this whole podcast, but let's shift. And I want to talk a little bit, not on politics directly, but it might not end up getting in here, but on our sector of advertisers. So I feel like advertising used to have a lot more rebels. And it feels like now a lot of the sector is even more true on the media side, but also true on the ad side, is full of just like blindly supportive of institutions, blindly supportive of the way things have always been done without pushback, which is actually counter to how a lot of the cool things on the internet were built by, people who push back against, you can't pick someone up in a car driven by someone else, or you can't rent out your house, a room in it for someone to stay in, right? Like, these are all ideas that were laughed at. But I feel like advertisers were actually pretty good at pushing internet adoption, which was, again, a rebel idea. But I feel now we've gotten to a point where maybe because the internet was too successful, maybe because there's too much money in it, maybe it's because all of these S&P companies have just eaten their markets and are just like fatted. But do you feel the same? And what do we do to get more rebels back in advertising?
Wow, that's an excellent question. I think there's a lot of things to unpack there. I mean, the first place that occurred to me was that there's generational things happening. So I'm Gen X, right? I was born in '76, and if you look, I'm quite proud of this. If you look at the birth rate, that was like the lowest birth rate in a long time, which means that there's literally fewer people my age than any other age, except maybe a few other categories of like baby boomers as they start to, die off, unfortunately. Which means that like my generation, I think, really viewed things differently than people who were born later. And there was a lot more of them, like literally more of them, like millions more people, right? And in my world and where I grew up, like rebellion was something that we all embraced. And so there's one factor, which is like demographics. So demographics was a big part of that. And also what you had when I grew up was that there was no internet, which meant access to ideas and access to information was controlled by like mainstream media. And there was a very distinct version of like underground media. And people were very clear about what these two things meant. And they were very easy to define because like I joked about making, a Xerox fanzine. They're obviously not professional media. The reach was limited to like, how many dollars I had in my pocket and I could stay up all night and staple together, right? Like 200. So it wasn't really going to have an impact beyond your friends. And the mainstream media was like hard to debunk. They said things on television or in the newspapers, and I took them at face value, as most people did. I still assume they were fairly well written and fairly well fact checked. They actually had like teams of fact checkers and all kinds of like people researching the article. So I think perhaps they were more high quality, but I do question like, the official narrative versus the underground narrative. And when that all flipped, now we have this very different world, right? And so I don't know, there's just so much the world is so different now. And the idea of rebellion, I think, means something different. So when I was younger, it was very obvious, right? You had the underground, you had the mainstream, you had this dynamic, and it was like cool to like perhaps rebel against the mainstream narrative. Today, you're in a world where everyone's a hipster. Everybody is a rebel. And in fact, what's done is like create this dynamic where there's nothing to rebel against, or it's been so co-opted that the meaning is very different than what it was. And so
everyone's a hipster, and yet they all listen to Taylor Swift. It doesn't make sense. So it's like someone was saying the other day, I saw a great comment that now you don't actually need to create anything to be a hipster or cool. You just have to move to a city, and that's like your personality.
I remember when this happened, so I remember like growing in New York, I had this massive record collection. I used to shop for other DJs, and like being DJ was kind of this cool thing. And it meant that like you spent a lot of time finding records, and they were very hard to find. You could just go on the internet and get it, right? You had to like, and I'd spend ridiculous amounts of money on these imports from the UK and stuff. And I remember when it flipped, like CDs and then MP3s came out. And then basically like to be a DJ, you just had to be like a celebrity. You just kind of showed up and then played an MP3 play or something. Like the bar just went way down in terms of like what was like literally required. Like you couldn't show up at the club with the MP3 plays. It didn't exist. You had to actually put a lot of effort into like finding the music. So I just think there's like the dynamics around like content creation and being a tastemaker have changed dramatically. And we live in this very different world where there's just massive fragmentation. And you've talked a lot about this, right? Where like, what is the correct number of blogs or the correct number of podcasts? It's like N plus, 1, right? There's just an infinite number. And so it's really different.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on social algorithms homogenizing everyone? So like you said, you used to have to seek out obscure vinyl because it would be different, and everyone would say, what is that? But now kind of algos go the opposite, and it's like, no, it's weird and different. We wouldn't promote that. It has to be sort of this consensus artist or consensus meme or consensus opinion.
Yeah, I mean, there's two ways to look at it. One is like, it's going back to what I remember. It was like there was a mainstream narrative, and if you were interested or adopting a different narrative, that was a rather rebellious thing to do. And maybe that's what's happening is like, it's just the definitions and the words have all been flipped. Hipster means you're a high-paid Silicon Valley worker, which was not what it meant when I was younger. And so being a rebel now means something very different too. So I don't know. I feel like all things like kind of come full circle in some ways.
There's a certain Silicon Valley meme that kind of cracks me up. It's a lot of the people who probably would have been like rebels before, or kind of just like I guess nonconformists are the same personalities that are posting that they're grinding working on Saturday in a kind of post-ironic way. And it's really interesting to see because they're not like the way that they talk about that grind, quote unquote, isn't the LinkedIn way. It's like their persona it's like edgy, right? And the edgy people are like obsessed workaholics, which is something that could only happen in tech, since you mentioned tech. I don't know if
I
you've
mean,
seen these types,
I
not
know
the
exactly
thread
what you're talking
bros.
about.
Yeah.
Like in some ways, I am that person, right? Like I was always this kind of idiosyncratic creative person that was interested in bleeding edge technology. And I think Vice magazine nailed it at one point. They just because they're similar to my age. I think the way that they framed it was like there's more people and there's more hipsters and there's more access. And just from my perspective, there's just a lot more than there ever was. And in some ways it's really positive, right? That like there is a world today that's much more open and embraces people in a way that wasn't true when I was younger. Like it was very strict, like when you need to work and there was an expected way to behave and they didn't have free snacks and they made you stay and work really hard and work really late and they're really mean. And like, this is not like a lie. Like I worked in a printing plant when I was a kid and like people hit each other. Like there's still had this like super old school German printing culture where these guys like physically harmed people. And so that's not like what I think is a great work environment. And so I always would tell people on my team or anything too, like, look, I came from a world that was like really hard and I don't miss it. I don't embrace it. I don't think it's appropriate. I'm really happy that there's a kinder, gentler environment now where people can work together. And maybe it's overcorrected. Like maybe people should be a little tougher and should work a little harder and not be as entitled. But I wouldn't want to go back to what it was. That was a terrible way. And I'm like so happy that kind of behavior, whether it's verbal or physical, is in terms of abuse, is just not acceptable in the workplace anymore.
Totally. So in the workplace for marketers, not related to that, another trend that I've noticed is kind of persistent, is that marketers really, and this is different than tech pros, marketers really care about industry recognition, awards from peers, going to, marketing festivals and whatnot, as opposed to like hackathons. And I understand it's probably brand marketers who like these things more than performance marketers who only care about economic impact. And it's certainly a different breed of marketer. But now that ZERP is over, do you think this will change? Is marketing forever doomed to be, win an award? Oh, the vibes are great. Or are we, for a while, we were actually really trending to be a more Moneyball type of sector. And now there's more pushback against that. And, people saying attribution doesn't work at all and it should just all be vibes. And any thoughts on where we're at, just like broadly?
Wow, great. This is a really big question. Qualitative versus quantitative. I think when you have an industry and let's say a certain portion of it is entirely qualitative, those types of institutions, whether they're awards or recognitions or rankings or whatever it is, they become important because you don't have other metrics to use, right? So you need to develop these institutions and have ways to measure it. I even go all the way back to like 17th century France. Like to be an artist was actually something that you were licensed by the government, and that's why you were included in the. I'm not saying it's good or bad. I'm just saying that's how it worked, right? Like, and the Impressionists were the renegades in that world, right? They actually were licensed with the French government to be paid artists, and the art that they created caused a ruckus. And I bring up this institution because like there's no way to measure like quantitatively and say like this one's a 3, this one's a 5, this one's a 7, right? You had an institution with people that were like the arbiters of taste, and they let you in or let you out. They created an inside-outside crowd. And there were a group of people inside who were like doing, rebellious things and within the context of that or institution, right? So I think that those types of things just have to emerge. Like if you can't measure it in a quantitative way, it doesn't mean that they're good or bad. And people have all kinds of routes to being successful. It doesn't necessarily require it. And so that's why I think the pendulum kind of swings back and forth with like, how much people admire these things and what their reputation is. I mean, look, I'm an optimistic person, very positive, and I like brand marketing. I think it's got value, and I think those institutions are good. I think that without them, it wouldn't have the reputation that it has. Doesn't mean that those institutions are perfect. I think they could do a better job at like bringing more respect and credibility to, let's say, brand marketing in particular, and putting more rigor around it. But yeah, in general, like I'm positive. I think you had a larger question too about like performance versus brand, and I have actually I don't know if this is controversial, but I'm on the camp that like performance is going away, or like what we knew as performance. So I had a startup that did app acquisitions as a platform in the like early emergence of iOS. And it was like perfect attribution, 100% deterministic. Like you knew everything. You could even understand the duplication between platforms and like account for that. And so now if you use that as your bar, like you could measure everything. You can't do anything close to that. So it shifted in terms of like what we can do, like specifically with measurement. And I think that we're going to continue to head in that direction where like deterministic measurement is going to be a pipe dream. Everything will be some form of probabilistic measurement. And I think it'll get harder and harder to drive like traffic at scale. And I think brand is going to matter more and more. I think it's similar to like what Airbnb has done. They maybe led the charge where they get a ton of traffic. The majority of it is through brand marketing. They don't do a whole lot of performance. And I think that's where a lot of people need to go. So I would say the skate and the puck is going in that direction. That's where people should skate if you're in marketing.
Makes sense to me. I'm someone who's just never going to get behind caring if I won an industry award. I care if we made money and, the company beat the quarter and we blew past MQL goals. Like that's why I think we're here. I'm just not like, especially when I see how, the critics grade movies and music, they have no taste in aesthetic. And I don't know that our industry is any different.
I won a bunch of awards very early in my career, and I was very disenchanted with like
I've won industry awards too. I just don't care
how it all played out. Yeah, well, that was exactly my experience. It was like I got these, and I was like, I felt exactly the same way. That like what mattered was the performance and like I think doing great creative is cool, and I even think getting recognition for it's cool. But like if your goals were flip flopped in terms of like trying to win awards rather than trying to do a great job for the business, that's right. For me, drew the line and really pushed my career in a certain direction, right? Because I don't think that was necessarily what a lot of people were looking for.
Yeah. I mean, the first question when I won an industry award when I was a junior marketer was, so am I getting a raise or a bonus for this?
Yeah.
Because why else do I care? They're like, I got to go to this big awards event. I'm like, okay, well, am I getting money for this? Sorry, guys. That's why I'm here.
I felt exactly the same way. I was shocked to find out that like, I was very young, so I thought it was like really cool. I thought it was something that you were supposed to do. And then I realized that like, it didn't really have a big business impact. And so, yeah I went down the same path.
Like, someone had a great comment that went viral the other day that said, to get the best performance out of your team, simply pay them more. And I think that that's probably true across the board for marketers. I think we're mercenaries. I think we come in, we do the job, we're good at it. And, if we wanted to have it be another way, we would be in another profession or, working to win an Emmy on that side of the trade, but that's not what we work on.
No. And I was always really interested in like cutting edge technology that like really got me excited. And that's why I always wanted to be in startups and work in Silicon Valley, like before it was cool, I guess. And like marketing was just a way that I could be a part of that. It was what I knew and what I had experience with. And I was really hands-on and early to a lot of the tools and technology. And that was what I got excited about. And I'm still excited about.
That leads into what we should talk about next is what is Alembic and what are you doing there?
Yeah, excellent question. I'm very excited about it. It's a new startup and they have a platform that measures all marketing. So it was like we're talking about with a challenge with like performance marketing and just measurement in general. And so cookies are going away, signal losses, making a lot of challenges for the performance side. And so you have that whole like dynamic occurring. And you still have, let's say 40% of all ad spend of the like $1 trillion spent globally is on channels that are offline, which are, let's say, difficult to measure or aren't measured in the same way. But I think that like what digital did was raise the bar in terms of what the expectation is when it comes to measuring marketing, which I think is still actually very good. I think that's a good thing. And the C-suite and the boards and big companies are all looking at their marketing saying like, we want to get that level of, accountability and certainty with that, with all our marketing that we get with digital. And that's what Alembic is designed to do. So we take all of the customers' data, or as much as we can ingest, and that can be first party data. So website analytics, social streams, advertising data, like whatever they have on the first party side. And then we instrument it to revenue layer. So that could be point of sales data. That could be some kind of lead or conversion data. And then we also have access to other types of third party measurement. So radio, podcast, television, it could be things that measure brand and sentiment. So we look at all of that, and then we do time series analysis. So we line it all up, and so we figure out like when it all happened. And we have proprietary algorithms that sift through all of the data and use AI to understand the customer journey, and then look for revenue spikes, and then try to understand the impact of revenue through what we call a causal chain. So we actually are using a similar approach to how the pandemic tracking was done with virus spreads, and using that on marketing to understand like, hey, this marketing event happened over here. It was the influence it had with all the other marketing events that created this revenue spike here. And that's what we call a causal chain. And our platform like literally defines that and finds, up to like thousands of these things, and then analyzes the impact of them all together to help you understand the impact, right? And then we can even forecast it going forward to help people get a better sense of like, what channels, what they should do with their marketing planning to maximize ROI.
That's awesome. That's a lot to process at once, which it sounds like your tool processing a lot of much. It's funny that you mentioned cohort analysis of, a virus, because I'm friends with the director of BI at Caesars in Vegas, and I was in his office and I saw a resume on his desk of a young person who wanted to come work at Caesars, and they had a background in biotech, and they'd actually worked on some oncology studies and things like that. I'm like, why do you have why do you have someone with a oncology background here? He's like, oh, well, it's just cohort analysis that we work on for the casinos. They do everything from knowing price elasticity of table games at certain hours of the day, what's charged, as well as how to price hotel rooms. They factor in all these things. And it was really interesting to me. Anyway, I'm like, can we keep the oncologist person on, curing cancer? And he laughed, and he's like, well, in the future, there will be a lot better tools to do this. I probably won't need like so much help. And it really sounds like we're getting to that point where companies don't necessarily need a huge BI department to do really sophisticated analysis on their.
Yeah. We look at it as like, so the current iteration, we sell the Fortune 500 CMOs, right? Because they have a lot of data, and they have really complicated business and marketing challenges, right? They have offline, online, they have, B2B, B2C. So like our first customer is NVIDIA, and you can see how like their business is really complex. Like right now, everyone understands that they're selling all these chips in like a B2B type of dynamic with hyperscalers, right? They still have a B2C business with all the cards and, computer gaming equipment that they sell. And so trying to understand like that complex of a business is really hard. And that's why they're looking for a platform like Alembic, right? So at the highest level, we look at it as like replacing or trying to augment what people are doing with like custom research studies. So like MMM or some of the brand research things people had done, they're really painstaking to put together. They take a long time. Like MMM takes 2 years of data, and it takes 6 months to process. So these things have existed in terms of like, how do we get a big picture look at measurement across all of our marketing? They've just been very expensive, and they've been manual for the most part. And so now the technology is emerging because of like the cloud. So all the data is in the cloud now, so you can access it, which wasn't true even 5 years ago. And now we have the compute processing power to process the volume of data required to get the kind of analysis that is statistically significant.
Yeah, and I'm bullish any tools that do analysis and get you to actionable insight faster, because ultimately no team wants to spend their lives doing complex analysis work or having to even bother a data science team, like when you have a question, right? Like
Right.
being able to ask questions of your data directly is something that every marketer should be able to do. And I feel like the better tools we get here, the more time we get back for the fun parts of marketing and advertising. So I'm still hopeful that tools like yours and others basically will exist to give marketers more resource to go do big, awesome, wild creative that people actually care about, and not have to have people killing themselves overnight doing like doing like Wall Street investment style research where you need to confirmation bias some idea from the CMO, and none of those things are fun, right?
No, I agree 100%. I mean, that's our kind of premise, right? Is like, um, that the world of marketing is changing once again, and we think the pendulum is swinging the other direction for like a number of reasons, right? So like signals going away. There's all this policy and regulatory reasons that measurement is going to change. You have AI, which is just changing everything. I think its impact in business is really significant. You've got a media landscape that just keeps fragmenting and splintering into all kinds of like new and innovative ways to do things. And so, yeah, I think that like for marketers, if they could get back to like storytelling and get back to like thinking about what's going to really resonate with the customer and having better tools to help guide them and measure things rather than putting so much resources into the measurement, that's where everybody wants to go. I'm with you. Like it was never fun to be able to have to like sift through like all the broken links because your UTM codes don't work in this tool or whatever it was, right? Like the actual implementation of the things were like very difficult. And so now you have new ways of thinking about it. There's new approaches. There's literally new mathematics that we use to help determine all this stuff. And so I'm really excited about the future. And I think there's gonna be a whole new way to measure stuff, and the market's ready. I think people are really excited about embracing a new way.
Awesome. And I love that you mentioned offline channels, because
Yeah.
obviously at AdQuick, we have an analytics suite to measure out of home ads. We're the only one that are really doing that in a serious way. So we'll have to get our data in your tool. So you mentioned Gen AI. I want to talk about that more because it is an interesting area for marketers. There's so much to say here. My favorite are the discussions where people forget that as a marketer, you are a merchant. You're an artist kind of, but you're not actually an artist. Like you are in the sense you have to get to great creative, but you're supposed to be flexible and use tools and be open to things. So when people push back, I'm like, is there really, like, does your user even care if at the end of the day, the ad had 10 seconds of stock art or stock video or whatever that was AI generated versus from Gannett? Like, would anyone even be able to tell? So it cracks me up, some of the discussions here from the purists. But you're a practitioner, so I'm curious, like, what are the obvious things you see Gen AI doing, and maybe some of the not so obvious?
Yeah, this is a cool question. I would use my DJ analogy because I know you're into electronic music. So because you remember when there was like vinyl, it's all manual, then it got more digital, and now it's like all digital, right? And so the tools can kind of do a lot of things that took some skill in the past to do. And I think the analogy is exactly the same. Like there's all these tools that are available. They make things that were hard to do much easier, but there's still a skill involved in terms of like generating the actual narrative, right? Like I can't use any of these tools to give me the specific like case study based on my customer, right? They don't know what we did with NVIDIA. Like it can't write that for me. I have to give it that information, and then it's just like another tool that can help me with the output. And I feel like it's quite obvious in some ways, but I feel like people generally miss that like tools are only as good as the information you give it. And a lot of the things that like marketers do are based on original ideas and original information that like these systems don't, they do not have. I do think that there's a whole nother group of like things that like they can do a good job at. So we're seeing customer service, places where the information is all stored in one place and it's easy for AI to access, and it's finite, or there's a limited set of like parameters around what it needs to do. AI will be very good at that. That's why it's great playing chess, right? There's not an infinite number of moves. There's a limited number of moves, a limited number of like ways that the game works. There's no qualitative aspect to it ultimately. And so it'll master that, and it'll be better than any human could ever be at it. But that's not how most things are. And so I don't know, in my mind, I kind of like delineate between those two. And that's for me been a great way to think about like where are the skills and areas, like if you want to continue to be really competitive in the job market, to focus on.
It's interesting you mention vinyl, because now there's actually a big vinyl resurgence of people who want the tactile feel. So, you know, even as a tech bro, quote unquote, I understand there's a massive market for nostalgia and for analog things. I played with analog synths in studio as well. I have a vinyl collection in my room, so I'm like, I straddle both worlds. And I think that these things kind of work together. And I guess to your other point about being able to prompt well, I think the problem, as always, is aesthetic. So if you have an aesthetic, especially the more unique, that's like to your own, like you could read a blog post or see a piece of marketing and be like, oh, that was definitely Gregory's style. Like, I think if that can happen for you as a marketer, you've done well for yourself, because you have a little bit, you've carved out something in the world that's not anodyne, that's not anesthetized, you know, that's not just like completely watered down to the point. It's just, you know, could have been created by anyone. Because I think the risk is for any creative job is if you can't tell who it was from, you're ultimately replaceable. I think that's why so many Netflix shows and movies are so bad, because they have so many people in the room working on the script, and auteurs are not allowed, you know, they have too much personality and would, you know, would not be able to tick all of the diversity boxes and all of the different, you know, messages they want in there. And so it ruins art because you have too many things, and real artists deciding what not to put in there. And so it will be interesting to see how the future works. I'm still bullish humans, whether with AI or doing things fully themselves. But I think it's all going to come down to aesthetic, and that aesthetic might not be your own. You might have to go into a company and like, if you're what's the new military tech company, a drill, like the really cool, so their marketing is super cool. It feels like almost a Command and Conquer game, right? So they have an aesthetic of like what that brand is. They've got like, you know, cool breakbeat and trip hop music they have an aesthetic. And so I think like, as a marketer, you either have to come in with your own if there is no brand yet and try and help them figure it out, or be able to plug in. But I don't think you can fully rely on AI to do anything. And if so, like an AI agent is going to be better than you anyway.
Funny. I mean, so I mean, like in some ways, the immersive AI has like actually changed how I approach content in my own style. Like I was joking the other day that like now I spell things or I use punctuation or casing incorrectly on purpose. And I kind of joked about it, and I started doing it because I was like, well, I think like sometimes I want to show the casual nature of what I'm like posting. And so I don't aim to like always be grammatically correct with something I used to do.
You're a better writer than the AI is. So I mean, you know, not everyone.
Yeah. I'm not saying I write it bad on purpose, but I used to always I was used to like a very formal world, like, you know, let's say 15 years ago, where everything was written in a formal way. And so I approach everything that way. And then one day I was like, this just reads like AI. Like, so now like I'll reply to people like, yes, no, thank you. Like I'll just do things that are more casual and not as formal as like I used to.
Yeah. To your point, a lot of corporations don't need AI to sound like robots. They've sound like that, you know, for decades.
That's funny. I think like things like that will emerge, like, or, incorporating slang or like using the vernacular and colloquialisms in ways that like I wasn't necessarily as bullish on in the past. So I am like thinking about like content differently than I used to because of AI. I think that it's easy for everyone to just create this totally generic, grammatically perfect content that's quite boring. It doesn't capture any of like the unique character. And so I used to actually avoid that, but now I think about it all the time, and like I think using like colloquialisms and things like that are valuable, and it'll help differentiate.
My peak use of Gen AI right now is, first of all, for stock photos, where it's not super important. It's just like conveying something or providing a visual because I have to put it in for the CMS or whatever.
Right,
Like
right.
it's already just as good as going to Shutterstock and getting a photo. So that's like the obvious use case. It's just arranging pixels. So for a lot of content, you don't need a professional photographer to go do something like completely iconoclast. It's fine. And then the other thing for me personally, I just share these because I think it's interesting what people are doing right now with AI, not what it's going to do in 100 years or whatever. I find that I don't get writer's block when I'm writing things for my personal blog, because I just write there for fun when I feel like it. But for like my work, AI will solve writer's block instantly, because I will ask Gen AI to just create a simple draft for me. And I know it's not right, but my writer's block is now instantly solved because I have something on the screen. I can work with it. I'm going to say, this sucks, this sucks. I'm going to edit this part. And ultimately you get to something.
Oh
So
yeah. I mean, dude, I mean, so when people ask me personally about like, what do I use AI or not? Like I always tell them like, look, I want every competitive advantage I can have in the marketplace, and I will use every tool I can find if I think that it's gonna be productive and make me more effective. Like I have no like religious concepts about like how things are supposed to be done. So I use everything. And I found that like there are some things I can get AI that just are brilliant that would have been impossible to do. Like I'm able to create charts and sort things and organize things in ways that are like I wouldn't have been able to do on my own. I wouldn't have a team of analysts. Like we had this SCADA versus IoT white paper I was working on. And SCADA, for those that don't know, is like the old institutionalized version of like custom electronics that operate machinery and factories. Like before IoT, they had to build these very expensive systems to do it. So we were laying out this chart about like what is SCADA and what is IoT. Like it'd be really, really difficult to do that. And then AI would just able to take all the research and information we had and create one single chart that defined all the different elements. It was like, I couldn't believe it. And then you could even prompt it to like, let's see it this way. How would you define it that way? And it was just like, I found some use cases for it that are like, they're really incredible. So I'm a huge fan.
I think listening to you is really interesting because you're treating the Gen AI as an assistant, not a magic genie to do your work, but something to direct and dictate. And I think that's the key point that a lot of people don't get when they're like, AI is going to replace everything and everyone. It's, ultimately it might replace the need for you to hire someone, as like a coordinator or assistant is really the thing that I took away from your comment and what a lot of other people comment about using it, because you're basically not having to do a bunch of work that you didn't want to do that was kind of like repetitive or brainless or sorting. And so that actually leads into my next question. So you're an OG marketer, you've been in this game forever, Silicon Valley, Seattle, you've worked companies and campaigns the world over. If I'm a junior marketer right now, like coming into the sector, what do I do? Like any advice for just starting out in our fields? Like, should they go into startups, large companies? Are they screwed because of AI? Like, what's your sense?
Yeah, I think it depends on who you are and where you're coming from and your approach, right? Like I had a very unique like entry into this world, and so like my advice, I think I guess like at the highest level, I would say that like, look, everyone's advice is unique to them. And the people who are really, really successful, what they've been able to figure out is how to use their unique attributes to become successful, which means that their advice is less and less relevant to you. So I would start with that as kind of like the whole lens about advice in general, is that you need to like be able to figure out like what's the right path for you, right? So starting with that as the premise, like I'm assuming that you're like not from the Ivy League, like you're someone who is like, you've got a degree, you're like interested in marketing, you're, let's call middle class, relatively, you know, successful and well off, and but like average. I think that like, you know, if you want to be successful in marketing and you want to build a great career, I think like you need to first like be in a location where that's effective. I think work from home is great, but you know, a lot of young people are moving to Austin or still move to New York, move to San Francisco, or move to Seattle. I think that still matters. And it matters a lot, particularly like if you're early in your career and being around other young people and building relationships with those people, like being in a place where you can have a critical mass of young people who are motivated and excited about their careers, and you can like interact with them. I think it's very hard to do if you don't move from like, if you live in like a small town or you live in a far flung suburb. So I think that's obvious advice, but something I still think is really important. And then from that, I would build on that, like building out a network, making sure that you're like aware and excited about what's happening in your community is great. And then, you know, like I think that like social media is more powerful than ever. And that's the one thing that I regret is like, or it's just changed. Like I wish I'd put more effort into it when I was younger. It was different than it is today, but I think it's very obvious today. Like if you start building an audience and experimenting with like your, let's call it personal brand, I think it's really valuable. And I think young people should definitely invest their effort, energy into like, let's call it a professional brand. If you want to be successful in your career, because you should primarily focus on that. And so I think that's important, right? So where you live, like that, the location matters. I think social media and thought leadership and participating in those things is super obvious. And I guess the third thing I would just identify is like, I think in-person events are coming back in a big way. And it's been a long time that we've seen a critical mass of people wanting to participate that. I think the online space has become difficult to like stand out, let's say. The algorithms are like just all pushing for like clickbait and trying to just drive traffic or drive clicks for advertisers. And so I think doing in-person things, meetups, like organizing your own type of in-person professional events, going to conferences, those things, I think stuff's really important, and perhaps wasn't something that was top of mind over the last 3 to 5 years with COVID and just a variety of things happened. But I think 2025, they're coming back in a big way. I mean, you and I met for the first time in person, which was great. And I would identify that perhaps as the goal, right? Like use online to build relationships, meet people, establish yourself, like stay on top of what's happening. And then use in-person events to like try to meet those people and strengthen those relationships and like look at it from a big picture perspective that there are great people all over the country, all over the world. And you want to be able to network with as many of them as possible.
I love that. And I've met thousands of people the world over, been invited to people's homes in Italy just from having connections online. And I agree with you. No matter what field you're in, you want to, any relationships or community you have from the internet, translate that to your life. Go grab coffee with someone. It's so easy to do. And who knows, you might start a company with them, or, you know, collaborate on a project, or it's helpful to solidify the relationship. So Gregory, I have one final question for you. We're going to talk about conspiracy theories. So for the audience,
okay, good.
We had a whole debate about conspiracy theories when I was in Seattle. And so I actually think it's a fertile area for marketers to have fun with. I'm curious, like, because conspiracy theories don't have to be serious. They can also be fun. People make jokes about them. So I'm curious, like, what are any lessons from a pure storytelling perspective or marketing perspective, watching some of the conspiracy theories, you know, some scary, but some, you know, lighthearted, some ended up being true, some of course silly. Like any thoughts or lessons from marketers from being a fan of this space?
Okay, I got a really good story. Very early on, when I was in advertising, we were pitching campaign to a customer that had a photo sharing websites. It was like pre-Instagram. And we're trying to come up with like viral ideas to generate like traffic and interest for the photo sharing sites. We had this big brainstorm. And so I'll never forget it. Like I came in one day and I was like, alien autopsy. And the executive director was like, he's like, what? I'm like, we're going to do an alien autopsy conspiracy and pretend that the photo has been leaked on this photo sharing site. And he's like, this is the best idea I've ever heard. So we went into the customer and we were like, we pitched alien autopsy. We're like, we're going to like make a fake hoax that these new alien autopsy photos have been released and they just happen to be on your photo sharing site. And like, they loved it, but we decided that it was like, it was too, I can't remember what the feedback was, too gross or just, it was, they weren't comfortable with it. So we went with like a different idea and we did this other like viral thing where it was a little toy that we passed around, kind of like a flat Stanley, if you've ever seen that. We had like different people take photos of the thing. And actually that was like really successful as well, right? So I love that example of like, I pitched this wild conspiracy theory concept and it actually led to like a really successful and fun campaign that, you know, wasn't alien autopsy, but was something that we all were excited about and like was like really, really successful.
I love that. And did anyone ever figure out what those monoliths were for that kept coming up? And like the media obviously all write stories on it. What was that?
It was an artist. He was just putting those up. It was just some kind of like art campaign. Just like the crop circles.
Maybe some guy's taking credit for, you know,
I don't know.
Space Odyssey.
Well, that guy came out in England and said that he made all the crop circles and he showed his methodology and like made a bunch of them on camera. And there's still people who don't believe it, right? They say that like, no, they're not true, but it's been proven. In fact, I had a friend who was the one that did the Hello Kitty crop circle. If you ever saw that,
That's awesome. You did a crop circle campaign. Like you made a real crop circle.
In the shape of Hello Kitty for Hello Kitty.
But a real one, not just like Photoshop. Like actually you had someone go and carve it out in the crops.
That was my favorite idea. That's my favorite crop circle conspiracy. I guess I'll go like ad campaign conspiracy theory concepts that I like. Like I didn't realize I had so many of these.
It's such catnip for the internet because the internet loves a mystery. You know, what is it? It's just a mystery. Yeah. So it doesn't have to be this, you know, evil bad thing of the deep state. It can literally just be like a fun crop circle or, you know, some sort of intrigue with your company and get people, when you get people to put in a little bit of work, that's like a powerful connector for your company, whether it's a contest or, you know, some mystery. And creating intrigue is like definitely a marketing 101 tenet.
Yeah, it's funny. I know I'm taking this a different direction, but like we talked earlier about brand marketing and we talked about what people do in their careers. And like, I'm a big advocate for like, look, I think there's always money available for excellent ideas. And like, look, I sold alien autopsy in, my friend sold in Hello Kitty crop circle. Like if you go come up with like really, really excellent ideas, you can actually get people to do them. And in general, they perform really well. Like people, I think innately know what a good idea is. Even the most conservative businesses out there, you know, and they have their parameters, right? Like alien autopsy is just too much for them. It was gross. It was just whatever, but it went in a direction that worked for them. And they were like really excited about it. And so I would push people out there to like, you know, be the creative rebel that you talked about. And really what is lacking is like a lack of ideas. It's not a lack of funding and not a lack of money. I hear marketers complain all the time that I can't get the resources for this. I can't get the money for that. But if you go in and you pitch excellent ideas, I guarantee you'll get the money.
Well, we're coming up in the hour and I don't know that I'm going to top aliens. So let us know where we can find and connect with you online.
Yeah. Look, you can follow me on X. I am G Kennedy. It's I_am_G Kennedy. And then I'm on LinkedIn. And yeah, I have my name on LinkedIn, Gregory Kennedy. So find me on both those places and have a YouTube channel. I just started it. There's some great videos up there. You can find that from my X profile, but it's I_am_G Kennedy, same as my Twitter handle.
Awesome. Well, thank you listeners for joining us this week. Tune in again next week where we'll have another awesome marketing industry guest.
Thank you.